8:08, 8 minutes right now past the hour. Helen Stapleton is in the house this morning. Good morning.
Hey, how are you?
How are you?
Good. I had to get through a train and 3 school zones, but I made it in time.
There should be Swanee, Cowan, and South.
Yep.
Actually, 4.
4. What's the 4th?
WCA is right across the street. They have a school zone, too.
Oh, okay. I didn't notice that one. Okay.
Oh, you didn't slow down for that
and
one?
And the train. If I see a blinking light, I'll slow down, but otherwise. And where did you just drop your kids off at?
East Coffee.
Oh, okay, that's where your grandkids go to school. Okay. I have Billy Dykes here with me today, and he is the president of the Tennessee AFL-CIO, and we're going to talk about unions today. Before we do that, though, I just have a few announcements for the party for May. This Saturday, May 11th at 1 o'clock at the Annex is the Black Caucus meeting. The head of the Tennessee party is going to come and try and get a Black Caucus started for this area. And then on May 21st is our just monthly meeting. We meet every third Tuesday at 5:30 at the Annex. So that'll be May 21st. And we hope to see you at some of these events. Okay, we have so much to talk about today, Billy, and I know you know so much more than I do. So, but before I like to have a person in context. So before we start, if you could just tell us a little bit about like where you grew up, what work you've done, your family, just a little bit about yourself before we get into the stuff.
Well, I grew up in Shelbyville, Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
Which, if you come to Franklin County, we always played football against each other back in the day. But I grew up in Shelbyville. My father worked at the pencil factory there in Shelbyville. My mother worked at American Can.
Is that pencil factory still going?
That has all changed so much. They still, I think
Al's
they,
nodding that it is still going.
I think they've kind of downsized it because back in the day, one of the things, I think they came to Shelbyville because there was a lot of cedar trees, and cedar was used to make the wood pencils.
Right, yeah.
My father worked in the graphite department and made the lead for the pencils. But I grew up there. I graduated from high school. I kind of, like most young men, I had an opportunity to go to college, didn't. Actually got into a program up at Oak Ridge, went to school at Oak Ridge at Y12, and then got into the nuclear industry. Worked around the country. Actually I've worked almost every state in this country, probably 2. Wow. Spent a lot of time in and around the building trades. Moved back to Tennessee in '93. Worked at the base a little while. Went to work as a steel worker at Eaton Corporation in Shelbyville, and then the plant. Actually, we were laid off, and I went to work at Bridgestone Firestone.
That's where you met my brother-in-law.
Yes,
okay.
Buzz. Always got to give a shout out to Buzz. I hope he's listening.
Hey, Buzzy.
Spent 22 years at Bridgestone Firestone, and in various capacities as a union member and a tire builder. I built tires. That's the assembling of the tires. And for the last 4 years, I've been fortunate enough to be representative of the labor unions across the state of Tennessee. That's an elected position. I'm up for re-election this year, so maybe some of my brothers out and sisters are out there listening to me. But I've been very fortunate and blessed. I came of a very poor family. My father was a sharecropper prior to coming. He actually moved to Shelbyville because he was a preacher. He preached at the Church of God in Shelbyville. So my background, it's actually odd that I'm such a staunch supporter of unions because my father never really was a union person. He really didn't know anything about it.
They don't have a preachers union.
No, they don't. But
or a sharecroppers union.
It was. I did see how he struggled. I saw how my mother struggled. I saw how they even changed the work shifts. My mother was even in the late part of her before she retired.
From what? What was she doing?
She worked at American Can.
Oh, right. Yeah, you said that.
And they went to working 6 months of nights and 6 months of days, 12-hour shifts. So I maybe some of those things and what I've seen in the benefits of being in a union have kind of helped me push forward and try to make a difference.
And I imagine working all over the country, you've been around all kinds of working situations.
I lived in Michigan for a long period of time. I worked at Enrico Fermi nuclear power plant, and that was before I kind of started going out and working on the road. So I was also privileged enough to be around a lot of the automobile manufacturing union folks. And you get a, I came back to Tennessee because I love Tennessee. But one of the best things that ever happened to me was getting out and getting to, go to California and Oregon and Washington State and Florida and Georgia and Kentucky and Rhode Island and Connecticut and Maine. To get a chance to work around different groups of people. It actually is a learning experience, especially, I think sometimes in the South, if you don't travel out of the South, you really don't get a chance to see the difference in the different areas and how, like when I was in Nebraska, I was surprised that there were a lot of Russian immigrants that had moved into Nebraska. And when you live up north, there's more of a closeness of the German communities and the Polish communities, the French communities, Italian communities. And in the South, we don't quite identify ourselves as, ethnic Germans or ethnic Russians or Czechs or Poles. And you see that more in the North than you do in the South. So it was, it helped give me a different perspective on life. I do love the South, and I love the people in Tennessee especially. But we do need that, I think, to help us develop who we are and what we try to do going forward in life.
Okay. So you said you're a history buff, so I wondered if you could give us sort of a comparison of, I don't know, you choose what industry you want, of what it was like to be a worker in that industry before unions started, when unions were at their heyday, and what it would be like to be in that same industry today with no union. Like, kind of take us through time. And you can choose welding, I don't know what.
Well, I tell you, maybe the easiest thing to do is to go all the way back to the Civil War.
Okay.
There's a lot of conversation about the Civil War. But a gentleman that named A. Philip Randolph was a black activist. He actually worked with Dr. King, and he said something that kind of struck me as odd. He said the Civil War was not about slavery as it was about the industrial North looking to exploit cheap labor in the South. And, growing up in the South, it's states' rights, depends on how you want to frame that. But if you look at the history of labor, at the end of the war, there were a lot of the textile industries moved to the South, and the reason is because they were already organized in the North. So it was a chance for them to exploit cheap labor, and that existed, so that they could hire young kids, they could hire poor whites, and also the free slaves, and those things are still even going on today. The chase for cheap labor.
Go into countries like Bangladesh. And
well, we as much as anything, the NAFTA trade bill set that in motion, but it was going on even prior to that. Companies moving from the North to the South to try to find a way to avoid the unions because it was easier to control the people that weren't as educated and were starving to have a steady income. At the heyday of unions back in the 50s, about 33% of this country was organized labor of the workforce, and that has over time seen a steady decline. For various reasons. One, trade agreements. And those trade agreements, I know there's a lot of focus on NAFTA, But you can go all the way back to the 60s when labor unions were arguing about trade, and it was actually Japan back in the 60s because they were bringing in cheap cars and those things, and so you can see the change in business thought. Right to work always comes into play because that's a great word, and I find that more and more, especially when you deal with politics. It's a great word, a buzzword to make people think, well, everybody's got a right to work, and that is true. But it also gave great latitude to companies to prevent organizing of
But can you give an example? Let's just take one individual, one person who was working in the textile industry, let's say, before unions came along, what their working conditions were like in the pre-union days compared to, say, a textile worker in the 50s that was in a union. Remember, like, the look for the union label on the clothes?
Oh, sure.
Okay, so compare a textile worker in, say, 1930 in the South before the unions came, and then someone in a unionized factory, say 10 years later, like just what daily life would be like as a worker, your rights, your...
Well, there would absolutely have been no safety requirements at all in the workplace before the unions came in. And the other thing would be the wages would be, I don't know exactly what the hourly rate would be, but I could guess somewhere
wages were lower, obviously.
very, very low. And the demands to work 12, 16, 18, 20 hours a day would absolutely have been part of what their life would have been like. And more than likely, they would have probably, a lot of companies had company stores, and they also owned housing. So a lot of people that went to work for them, they would work all week, and they may work 90 hours in a week, and at the end of the week they would still owe the company $3 or $4 to say, back in those days. So they actually worked for the company, but there were no benefits. It was all constantly, you were constantly being behind. There was no way to make enough money to not owe the company money at the end of the week. And
What's that song, I owe my soul to the company store?
well, and a lot of that started in the coal mining industries.
Compare, say, a coal miner, a unionized one versus a non-unionized one, like what they would have in terms of benefits, pay, protections.
Well, yeah, up until the 20s, and when you started to see, actually the 20s and 30s is when you really started to see the major push to unionize in the coal mines, in the steel mills, and a lot of that all is intertwined because a lot of the things that are mined are also used in the smelting of metals, and so life would have been dig until you fall. You would have not have been required to do any type of testing to see what the work environment as far as dust and those things, and of course you saw a lot of the stuff in the 50s and 60s with black lung. It would have been probably a 20-hour day, just enough time to get home and grab some sleep and get something to eat, and then back into the mines. It would have been
No overtime pay either.
No, no, and you know those things were all part of the struggle. Even even our own union members sometimes forget where we came from. The 40-hour work week and overtime pay and paid holidays and vacation and
even the very idea of a weekend.
The weekends.
Right, that was not a thing until unions,
No.
People sometimes got off Sunday, but definitely not Saturday and Sunday.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Well, you had mentioned a little while ago in your talk the expression right to work. Can you explain that whole concept, the whole idea of a right to work state versus a not right to work state and what that means? And then also, could you compare a right to work state with a one that, or maybe the same state, what it was like before it became a right to work state, and then what it was like after it became a right to work state.
Well,
But first of all, what is a right to work state?
well, a right to work state is if there's a union, depending on what, if you go to work at, I'll just use Bridgestone. You go to work at Bridgestone, and Bridgestone's a union factory. So, the steel workers represent all the workers at the factory. You have a right to either belong to the union or not. You get all the same benefits. You don't pay dues. And if you are, let's say you get sick and the company decides to discipline you, by law the union has to represent you even though you don't pay dues.
So you're just getting a free ride.
It is a free ride. The ironic thing about that, and I know I'll try not to get off too far, the people that push right to work, in the Chamber of Commerce is one, big business, they all have fees. If you want to belong to the Chamber of Commerce, you have to pay a fee.
And you get all the benefits.
You get all the
from-
benefits.
Yeah.
And there actually was a labor union in Alabama that joined the Chamber of Commerce, and a year later, and I have this letter, they wrote to the Chamber and they said, look, we're kind of having some financial difficulties. We want to belong to the Chamber, but we can't afford it this year. And the Chamber wrote them a letter back and says, oh, well, if you don't pay your fees, then you can't be a member. It wouldn't be fair to our other members that paying fees. And that's kind of what right to work is.
Yeah.
It's you don't have to be a part of the union. We do have to represent you. I don't know that the Chamber would represent you if you didn't belong to the Chamber. And so you have the ability to not be a part of a labor union. Now, in a closed shop state, which is not right to work, if you work at a union facility, you must be a union member.
And pay the dues.
Now, the recent Janus decision, I don't know if you are familiar with Supreme Court ruling, was about teachers. And in a lot of the, especially California, New York, if you were a teacher, it was called fair share. Now, you didn't pay full dues, but you had to pay a share in order for the union to represent your interest. In that Janus decision, they struck down that you'd have to pay a fair share. You have a right not to belong if you're a public sector employee.
Our current Supreme Court's very anti-union. Because it's right.
Well, it's very pro-business, and that's something else. I do want to say, I don't know a union member that's not pro-business.
Right.
And sometimes, when I'm talking to the folks at the legislature, I tell them I'm very pro-business, because without business, we're not working and we don't have jobs. All we want is a collective voice in the decisions that are made. But back to the closed shop, it is a situation where if you're going to work in a unionized facility, you will belong to the union. Now, whether you participate or not, that's a whole nother story. It is odd. Now, I was in Wisconsin right after they passed right to work, and they were amazed that in the South, even though it's a right to work state, union membership at most unionized facilities is well over 90%. And they were shocked. They were a little afraid.
So people choose to be in the union
Yes.
even though they don't have to.
Because they see the benefits.
Right.
The union workers on average.
What are the benefits? So describe the difference between a unionized one and a worker and a non-unionized worker. What do they get?
Well, on average, a union worker makes about 30% more than someone that works at a non-union facility, and that's when you include pension, defined pension benefit, not just a 401k, health care, especially in the building trades. If there's any young men out there that want to get into the building trades, now's the time, because they don't pay anything for their health care, and they've got some of the best health care in the country. But health care, overtime pay, paid overtime for holiday work, and the benefit of being able to sit down and talk openly and honestly with the company about you know, what your needs are in the factory. And safety is a huge issue. You know, being able to go to work and come home every day to your family is important. You have people to represent you if you get hurt at work. There's and I'm not, first of all, not all companies that don't have unions are bad companies. I don't want anybody to think that that's the case. There are a lot of good companies out there that take care of their employees, and they don't feel the need to have a union, and that's all well and good. But there are a lot of companies that will tell their employees if they get hurt, they will be fired if they report it. Those are the things, or you know, if you go out sick, they can fire you. In the state of Tennessee, you work at will. You can be fired for looking at somebody's paycheck if they so desire, and there you have no legal recourse. So the benefits of being in a union is you know what your benefits are. You know that you're going to have a defined pension benefit. You may even have a 401k, a negotiated 401k. You're going to know your work hours. You're going to have the ability to choose your shift based on your seniority on the job. Those are things that are not available to folks that are not represented by a union.
I mean, yeah, I know so many people who work at places where they will not give them a set schedule. So these people have the hardest time planning daycare, planning life. You know, they never know at any given minute whether they'll be able to be somewhere because they might have to be at work. You know, they can't. Their employer just won't give them a set schedule. It just changes week from week. And I imagine a union person would probably know their schedule a little bit more.
You would have the ability to bargain your schedules.
Right.
You know, one of the things, and you bring that up, and this is something that we've seen even in the state legislature, is this move towards independent contractor designation, where a company would basically hire you and call you an independent contractor. When they have that ability, which I think you'll probably see more and more, you know, there was the temporary employee thing kind of swept in the late 80s and early 90s, where they work people so long and then lay them off and bring them back, and the whole cycle starts all over again. But we've seen a move towards independent contractors, and that all sounds good. The problem is you don't have any workers' comp, you don't have any insurance. You know, you may feel comfortable thinking, well, I'm going to make my own schedule. Well, you may make your own schedule, but you may not be working. And there was actually some legislation passed last year in the state of Tennessee around this independent contractor concept, and it was a little concerning. It doesn't affect our union members right now, but I think in the future, people are going to see that companies see the benefit to designate you as an independent contractor in an effort to avoid, you know, workers' comp, health care, pension, you know, insurance.
Yeah, and one thing I see a lot of the industries around here doing, like Tepro and those kind of places, is they'll hold out. If you work here for this long, then you'll get the benefits. They work you until like a week before that time comes. Then they let you go, and then they rehire you anew. So you're starting from scratch again towards getting those benefits. You never get them. They just kind of hold them out as a carrot in front of you that you're never going to get.
And it creates an environment of, and I think everywhere, you know, there's always that competitive nature amongst people too, and in the South too. You know, we have a tendency, I think, to work harder. We feel obligated to go to work every day and work hard. I was always taught that, you know, an honest day's pay for an honest, you know, day's work. But you know, you know, this path to employment. Some of them have that concept of path to employment, and you know, you get 6 months in. Well, you know, you didn't meet these things, so you know, you got to keep working, and you know, we'll eventually hire you on full time. And some people stay temporary for 5, 6, 7 years, you know, or you know, some people are just suddenly terminated at the end of those times. And that's that's supported by a lot of industry in Tennessee and across the South, and I'm not so sure it's not even started around the whole country. There's a major chain that every city has in it that uses that concept quite well. To hire folks, not give them 40 hours so they're not considered a full-time employee, and then they don't have to provide benefits. And so it is it's a difficult thing. The other side of it is, and we mentioned right to work. I've been on several organizing campaigns. Access to employees that decide they want a union is difficult. The employer a lot of times will be able to bring their employees in, run negative propaganda, and you don't have that access. And so it makes it difficult in a right-to-work state to organize, and people are scared.
If anybody has any questions for Mr. Dykes, the number, Al, is
967-2201.
Yes, please call in if you have a question for Billy Dykes about unions. Okay, so I have a question for you. This has been in the news a lot lately about the Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga. Supposedly the company of Volkswagen was okay with there being a union, but that the governor of Tennessee and the politicians of Tennessee didn't want it, and that they meddled in and tried to stop it. But the people who worked there, they voted for it eventually, right? Or can you just tell us a little bit about what's going on right now at Volkswagen in Chattanooga?
Well, let me take you back a little.
Okay.
Volkswagen Germany is actually union. All the Volkswagen facilities in Germany are union. Actually, the members of Volkswagen Union actually sit on the board of Volkswagen, and the thought process is that they would have the same concept. It's an employee-employer involvement type thing. Actually, it's called a European model. If you go, and we'll bring Buzz and myself back into it, the tire plant I came out of actually started the same way. It's the one in Warren County. It's the last tire plant organized in the state in this country, not just state of Tennessee. But it started as a partnership, and it really and truly is a partnership. And now it's had its struggles, but that plant is one of the top 5 performing plants in the world, not just the United States. And it's because of that partnership, and that is more along the lines of how they operate in Germany and in Europe.
Oh, okay. Well, we have a question, but I do want to get back to the VW. Do I just hit number 1? Okay. All right. We have a question for you. All right. Hello?
Hi there. Yes, good morning. I have a question because I was recently laid off about the job was abolished. So in this area of Winchester, Franklin County, they are so against any union, belonging to a union, and they express that when you're hired. So I'm wondering why, because of some of the reasons he's been giving, I think that's why they don't have to provide certain benefits. You have no voice to speak for you. So whatever decision is made by the CEOs of the company. Is that the way it works in our Franklin County, or is that hopefully going to be changed?
That question's for you.
I think that there is a overwhelming majority of businesses, not all of them, that see the union as a impediment to their business, and so they love to talk about the negatives. And look, and we have negatives. We're not without our own problems and things that that we've done that's not helped people understand who we are. But yes, you are right. There are a lot of plant managers and management and CEOs of companies that like to tell you all the negatives. And like I said, we're not perfect. We have our issues, but they don't want people to collectively organize and use their voice.
Right.
It's odd that a CEO of a company negotiates a contract for himself.
Right.
He can get
Because
fired.
they can make the rules. Nobody can change that. You have no voice. So that's why I was curious about how it's going, whether there's anything can be done to force these companies into having a choice of what you want to do. It's really not fair, I don't think, because there's a lot of discussion going on among the people that have been affected by it, and it's so unfair for some people to lose their jobs because that's the only income they have.
The only way to make it fair is for people like yourself and the people that are working at these companies to stand up and say they want a union, and then the struggle really begins. It doesn't start with just saying it, I don't mean to get off topic or out of the subject, but this is what I see even across this whole country. People don't vote. Tennessee was last in voting in the last presidential election. I think it was like 10% of the registered voters. We have to stand up. People like myself have to talk about the benefits of being in a union, and to be honest with you about the negatives. And they are there. But people collectively have got to decide they've had enough.
Are y'all sending organizers into companies that aren't unionized and asking people, or?
Well, these are large companies. I mean, it's not like one of these little, companies here that just starts on their own, and they're big outfits, and they fight against each other. I understand that, and it's really bigger than you can't do a lot. You feel like you have no voice. But I know the government probably is the one to go to talk to about this, to try to push it for the people that are coming on, because the young people now are going through the same thing. They don't want it. They don't understand. They don't make it available to them to understand the benefits of. They push their rules through and promising the moon, you know what I'm saying? And then what happens? They don't keep the people. Once they learn, they're not going to stay with the company. The company is wasting a lot of money, introducing them and qualifying them to work there. So it's a little bit iffy. But I do have two sons that are unionized, and they are so happy that it's worked out for them. So I just wanted to ask a question on my behalf. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hit the speaker button.
Okay.
All right. Your options are, if a company is not unionized, of course, the majority of the employees there have to get together and decide they want union representation, and they have to vote to say we want to organize. All right. Then they've got to select what form of union they want to have as their bargaining agent. And so they got to do that. Once that happens, then they've got to put together a group of people that are basically going to be the organizers inside the plant to sign people up. And then you go through a vote session of whether or not you want to unionize or not. And then the pitfall is that company saying, well, if you want to unionize, we're going next door somewhere else. So that's the downside of becoming a union. And the reason I can say that is I went through an organizational period in my life. When I went to work for a TV station in Chattanooga, we unionized, we became Teamsters. And the first time around, we had to back down and say, oh, no, we're going to back up and regroup. And went back in. And then the second time, we did a lot of picketing and a lot of work outside the building until it came in. And then, of course, the station ended up selling to another company after that. So you lost all of that. And I don't even know if it's unionized today or not, to be honest, on it. But those are some of the pitfalls of becoming union and some of the fears of becoming union, especially maybe in the southern area. And I know in the entertainment world, things are so structured unionized wise, like movie sets and places like that you can't touch a piece of equipment, without having the proper person that's unionized to handle that piece of equipment. It just means unplugging a device or plugging in a audio device. So in some places it's real stringent on how strict the unionization is. So and I understand it locally in Franklin County and other rural areas. There's always been a big fight not to bring union in because it would hurt the community.
And I'm thinking about, like, say, I keep saying TEPRO, but I'm these people who are working 80 hours a week, how are you going to even have time to do that? Like, that's why I feel like someone would have to come in from a union and lead up the effort, because
but you got to ask the union first before the union can do it.
Right. But those people are so busy, like they barely have time to sleep and get groceries. Like, how are you going to have time to organize your workplace on top of it? But that's the first step, right?
Yes, and he hit on something too that that has aided companies in pushing the anti-union conversation. They'll up and move, and I'm not going to say it hasn't happened. They have, and that sometimes it's so stringent. You can't unplug a cord.
Yeah.
And that is something that has changed and is changing. At times we can be our own worst enemy. We can bargain ourselves out of jobs. And I think what we've seen is at times we didn't change as times changed. And so you see those kind of things going to the wayside, where a person can't go unplug a cord because he's not this or that.
Right.
But those things have existed and probably still exist in some ways. The very difficult part of an organizing campaign is just what you said. One, if the company finds out that you've reached out, they'll probably fire you. Now, there are protections there, but that don't mean you're going to go back to work. I was involved in an organizing campaign where a young man got fired. We actually ended up organizing this company, and we actually went to the National Labor Relations Board, and he had an opportunity to come back to work or take his money, and we got a settlement from the company because they fired him unjustly, and he decided he didn't want to go back to work for the company. But it is made very difficult to try to organize because of the things you just said, and the company's ability to terminate your employment if they find out. And the lady that was on the phone earlier, she said something about the government. Well, and this stretches beyond parties. It's worse now, I think, than it's ever been. And I said at the state legislature, people should, and they don't have time. But there is so much outside the state of Tennessee money involved in making local and state laws
Against unions?
against everybody, just the
Against
whole
workers.
against workers. It's an onslaught of the Koch brothers and Americans for Prosperity, and you name it, these groups that are out there that are not looking out for the interest of working people of Tennessee. And I tell people this all the time. I don't just represent labor unions. I represent the working people of Tennessee, because when we do good, even though you're not in a union or you're not a part of a company that's unionized, our ability to negotiate good benefits attracts people. And
It lifts everybody else up. So even if you're not in a union, you are benefiting from people who
yes.
are in a union, right?
Yes.
Right.
And I want to go back to the Volkswagen. Even
It is unionized today, though, Volkswagen.
only the maintenance folks voted to unionize.
Okay.
They lost a very close vote. Prior to the vote, though, the folks, Senator Corker actually was in Germany. The UAW, Volkswagen had all agreed that it would be a union facility under a European style, or where the folks working in the factory, in the union, and the company would have an equal say in what went on at the plant. And that was all agreed upon. That was all.
And it's rare that the company is okay with the union.
Yes.
I mean, if it were Nissan or someone else, they'd be fighting that tooth and nail. But
Absolutely.
Volkswagen was actually, yeah, y'all can have a union.
Well,
That's really
it's
fun.
because it's worked so well in Germany.
Right, they're used to it. Right?
But there was a lot of outside interests came in, outside money. But see, it goes beyond just Tennessee. It's the major automobile manufacturers not wanting the auto workers in the South to start organizing, and they were afraid that if Volkswagen organized, then it would lead to BMW and Mercedes, maybe even Nissan, Kia's here, Toyota. It's kind of odd with Toyota. Toyota, when they build their factories, they use all union labor because of the skills of the union labor. But when they open their factories, they're non-union, which is kind of odd. But it stretched further, and it was a huge. We don't want the auto workers in the South, because a lot of the auto industry has moved to the South. Well, Tennessee probably is the Detroit of the 50s right now, because there's so much automobile manufacturing here. And it's even crazier that Spring Hill has rebounded the way it has, and the partnership there between the UAW and Spring Hill, that's how that started. And then to have politicians, even the governor, go and speak to the folks at Spring Hill and talk about how great a job the UAW and General Motors are doing together, and what a great partnership, and then to turn around and tell the folks at Volkswagen, we got some money promised to you, it may go away. And here's the other side of this story that most people don't know is, we give almost $1 billion of taxpayer money. And a lot of the labor that assembled the equipment inside that Volkswagen facility were here on H-2B visas.
Tennessee gave $1 billion.
Almost $1 billion.
To Volkswagen. Okay, wow.
And they used workers on H-2B visas from Croatia, Romania, Yugoslavia to do a lot of that work.
They didn't even hire Tennesseans.
They did not hire Tennesseans. And that is the other side of what's going on in the state, in the construction and building trades. The Hancock plant that's going on in Clarksville, there was a lot of state dollars given there. They used folks from Korea in the facility. The money in these construction projects, the money is not going to Tennessee companies, construction companies, as much as it is from companies from Texas, Louisiana, even Ohio. They bring their own workers, and so those tax dollars are not, our tax dollars are being used, and it's not benefiting all the company and the people of Tennessee as it should. And the same at Volkswagen. They've applied for a new election there. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. There'll be a lot of arm twisting. The governor, our new governor, just recently went to the plant and had a closed meeting with all the employees. He didn't quite say you don't need a union, but he said it in no uncertain terms.
Okay. This is a partisan radio show. I'm going to tell you that. It's it's sponsored by the Franklin County Democratic Party. Do you believe that Democrats are more a friend of labor than Republicans?
I'm going to give you the long and short of it.
Okay.
If you look on the national level, there is no doubt that folks from the Democratic side of government in the national level have been more friendly to labor. Now, you also got to look at, Dwight Eisenhower was a big supporter of labor. He was a Republican.
That's the old Republican Party.
But it was.
It's a whole new thing now.
And you got to give Richard Nixon, of all things, some credit, because we wouldn't have OSHA without him. And he was instrumental in that. But overall, on a national level, I would say yes. The Democratic Party nationally has supported labor, and the effects of it you can see even at the National Labor Relations Board. Most people don't realize that whoever the sitting party is tips the scales of the board, and most of the time the National Labor Relations Board is made up of lawyers that are more pro-business under Republican administrations than they are pro-workers, which normally flip-flops. Now on a state level, I couldn't say that. I think it's what's made it difficult for us in the South. Right to Work came in when we had a supermajority of Democrats. So it's hard to say that on a state level, because there were a lot of good things that when the Democrats were in power in the state of Tennessee that didn't happen, that could have happened and should have happened.
Can I say just real quick, I brought this with me about what happened to our teachers. In 2010, we had a huge Republican wave, the Tea Party wave, that Republicans totally took over. So this is what it was like to be a teacher pre-2010, when Democrats were in control, and post-2010 when the Republicans took over. So before, teachers had a voice in their profession through negotiations. They had the TEA could negotiate for them. After 2010, they lost their right to a negotiated contract. Before 2010, basic teacher due process rights were protected through a tenure law. Now, tenure does not mean you cannot be fired. A bad teacher can be fired. It just means you have to go through due process. But today, tenure rights have been greatly diminished, and non-licensed employees can just be fired at will. There's no steps you have to go through to fire them. A workable teacher evaluation system was in place before, and if you talk to any teacher today in 2010, what they have to do to get evaluated and all the testing, and they spend more time on their evaluations and testing than they do on teaching, and that's post 2010. Before, teachers were represented by the TEA on the state retirement board. There were actual teachers on the retirement board. Today, TEA representatives have been replaced with political appointees, lawyers and things like that. So they have no more representation on the state retirement board. And limits were placed on questionable charter and quote-unquote virtual schools. Well, as we know now, it's the Wild West. It is the Wild West. There's these unproven charter schools and virtual schools. We just now are getting vouchers. So elections have consequences, y'all, and I'm sorry, but when you vote for Republicans, workers and teachers are going to lose. And,
I would like to, if we've got time, talk a little bit about this education savings account.
5 minutes.
Vouchers.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
And this is what a lot of people don't understand. They're going to issue these folks a debit card. If you've got 5 children, you're going to get a debit card loaded with $36,500. You can then decide if you want to homeschool your child or children.
I thought that, no, I don't think homeschooling applies.
Did they pull it? I didn't think they pulled it. But
They've now moved it back to only
Okay.
2 counties are getting the money. Memphis and Nashville are the only 2 counties that are getting any of this money. They've taken Chattanooga and Knoxville and Madison out of the mix.
Okay.
So there's only 2
But-
places now that are getting it.
I didn't know they moved it.
Well,
they must have. Last week is when it finally went through.
And what killed me about this is the way they sold vouchers to individual legislators is bribing them by promising them they won't bring vouchers to their county. And when Governor Bill Lee came to Franklin County not long ago, he said, "Oh yeah, we're going to get vouchers. It's going to be great, but don't worry, it's not going to come here." So if something is so great, why do you have to sell it by saying?
And the testing requirements are different. For public the homeschoolers are going to be tested on or not homeschool. I apologize. I've got that hung up on me. The private schools that take this money are only going to be tested on language arts and math. And public education is different. I think there's 5 different categories. But they're going to lump all the students into one and give an average, which is not going to be a true test of whether that school is actually educating the children that's supposed to be helping the most. You know, we are 47th in education in this state. We're talking about, and I just saw something the other day, that this program is going to cost $335 million as opposed to $125 million.
For 2 counties.
So we're going to put $335 million into an experiment that's supposedly a pilot program, and yet we've got teachers trying to teach 25 and 30 kids.
If you took
in
half of
class.
that money and plowed it into the public schools of Shelby County and whatever county, think of the good that would do. But yeah, and like if just 6 kids from Franklin County High take those vouchers, that's enough to pay a teacher. So Franklin County High is going to lose a teacher. You know, on that.
Elections do have consequences. You're correct.
Boy, they do. Okay, we got 2 more minutes. So, I wanted to ask you one more thing. So what, I heard that they were thinking about getting rid of workman's comp in Tennessee. Is that true?
Last year there was legislation that would have allowed companies to opt out. It's kind of odd that labor unions, the insurance companies, and the National Federation of Independent Business got together and we lobbied, just to use the correct term, but we worked hard to see that didn't happen. That's that happened in Texas. It's where it came from.
They got rid of workman's comp?
Yeah, they have an opt-out. Companies can opt out of workers' compensation.
So if a worker gets injured on the job, what happens to him?
It would be up to the company to make that decision.
So each individual worker has to negotiate with...
It would be... I can't see where it would benefit anyone in the workplace. We actually, workers' comp laws changed in Tennessee. It changed starting in 2010. Originally started back under the Bredesen administration. It has changed. It really moved the trial lawyers out of the workers' compensation system. It needs some improvement, but the system flows better than it has. We don't need to worry about workers' compensation in the state of Tennessee.
Okay, well that's good. That's something I was worried about. Okay, what do Democrats on the state and federal level need to do to win back the support of rank and file union members? I see so many union people, voting for Trump, and the Republicans are just going to, and I don't want to use that word. They're going to hurt workers. I mean, they're all on the side of big business against workers. And how is it that union members are voting for them?
What's got to happen is they've got to start talking about working people's issues. And look, I understand the social issues.
I hate the social issues. I wish they would just go away. It's such a distraction.
The thing about it is regardless of where you fall in the gay, lesbian community, black, white, Hispanic, we're all working people. And when you talk about working people's issues, you lift everybody. And people want to hear. And they resonated to the president because he said things they'd been wanting everybody to say, is it's time we quit getting cheated in trade, and it's time we did these things that we need to do. It's not that easy. It's easy to say, it's harder to do. But people want to hear working people's issues. They want to hear about workers' comp and health care, and how is it that the richest country in the world, in the history of man, has health care that's not working, and we rank towards the bottom of industrialized countries in health care. And the people that mean the most to us, our teachers, our firefighters, and our police officers, are the least paid in the greatest country in the world. We're supposed to be taking care of our children. And so they've got to start talking about those issues. And until they do,
I hear them doing that. I don't know.
Well, I think what happens is, and the Republican Party has been really good at framing the social issues to the point that that a lot of working people have turned and they pay a lot of attention to the social issues when it's kind of the red herring thing.
Which it's a total. It affects like a teeny tiny minority. Yeah, I know. I wish everybody would just shut up about the social issues on both sides.
Well, they're going to be here. It's a religious issue. I understand. my father was a preacher, and I said to somebody the other day, I never would have imagined I would have heard my dad speaking about presidential politics in the church. I think there was a reason that, we had the separation of church and state. You can argue those things all you want. God's never going to leave us, and we're all going to be here until that day we meet him again, however that works.
It is 9 o'clock, so if you have one more thing you want to get out to the people of Franklin County, this is your time, because we've used up our time.
Well, I think the most important thing, and we've touched on some of it, if you feel the need and you feel like you need to be represented by a labor union, pick up the phone and call somebody. Just talk about it. Get an open, honest answer. If it ain't what you want to hear, that's okay too. If you're compelled to do so, you should. The other thing is voting. I suggest that people educate themselves on candidates, not on parties, that they get out and vote. It's easy to vote. In some instances it's made harder other places, but get out and vote, because when only 10% of the people are electing folks, it's not a true representation of who we are and what we're, and it is definitely a right and a privilege to vote. So please get out and vote in your next election.
All right, thank you so much.
You're listening to WCDT AM 1340, W295 ABFM 106.9 in Winchester, Tennessee.
In Washington, trade talks in trouble. I'm Mike Moss. Tensions are rising between the Trump White House and House Democrats. The White House says it's exerting executive privilege over the Mueller report, while the judiciary